let's talk about starting Access. To start Access, we go to the Start button, and we're going to look at all of our programs and locate Microsoft Office 2013. Open that up, and you'll find Access 2013. And we want to click on that to open that. Now, I have a dual monitor, so mine opened up on the other screen. So I'll pull it over here so that hopefully we can see it. And perhaps I'll try that again so you can see. And let me close this. And let's open it again and see if it'll open up for us. Now, where do I go? Start button. All programs. I'm going to scroll in my programs list until I find Microsoft Office 2013. Click on that, choose Access 2013, and it opens up on my desktop. So here we are, and you can see what that looks like. Okay. Now I have a toolbar up here that I want to move down. Actually, I can't do that. I'll move it up a little bit out of the way. And hopefully you can see my full screen here. So here we look at this. Notice that you have the title of the software. Here you see a list of recently opened databases. I don't have any. I haven't opened any, so it says to browse for a file, start by clicking on Open Other Files, which is this down here. Notice how that is a link. The arrowhead, which is our pointer, changes to a hand with the index finger pointing up, which means there's a link that we can click on. So we also notice that over to the right we have custom web app, blank database, desktop database, asset tracking, contacts, issue tracking, project management, task management. There's some templates already built into this. So we want to make sure that we have the Access program started. And so we want to go over here and choose blank desktop database right there. And when that comes up, you'll see a dialog box that says File Name, Database 3. Now, your book tells you to call the file that's within the Tutorial 1 chapter Chatham. But remember, I have you save yours a specific way. I want you to type in your last name, your first initial, and then the word Chatham that your book tells you to save this as. And so, since my name is Spring Tucker, my last name is Tucker, so I'm going to type in Tucker. And my first initial is S, and then the name of the file, as the instructions told us to do, Chatham, or the name of the database, which is our database file, Chatham. Okay, and where do I want this to go? Okay, there's a browse button here. It looks like a little folder out to the right of where I typed in my name, the name of the database. And if I point to that and just hover over top, I get a screen tip that says browse for a location to put your database. So if I click on that, I have a window that opens, and it'll allow me to choose where I want to save this to. Where is it I want to put this? So when you're doing this, your book tells you to navigate to the drive and folder where you're storing your files, as specified by your instructor. Well, this is an online class, so you have to determine where you're going to save this stuff. I would recommend that you have a CTI folder, CTI 110 folder actually, and you could place that into your documents folder. So I'm going to create a new folder. Notice that I'm leaving it here at documents. I'm going to do new folder, and I'm going to say CTI space 110 space, I'm going to do FA for fall 14. Okay, and I press enter and see I have that folder. Notice my file name here is Tucker S. Chatham, yours would be whatever your last name and first initial is, followed by the word Chatham. And then we're supposed to make sure we save this as a Microsoft Office 2007-2013 database. That should be the default right here. So you want to look at the box that says Save as Type, and it should say Microsoft Access 2007 through 2013 databases. If it does not, you're going to go to the drop-down list for that box, and you're going to choose the 2007 through 2013. Once you're sure that that is selected, you're going to click OK. Okay. And I'm going to click OK again. It'll go into that box. I'm going to create. Okay. And so now I'm at a new blank table. Now, I'm not going through everything that this chapter says in doing this recording because in this chapter they talk about switching to touch mode and things such as that. I'm using Windows 7, so I don't have the touch availability here, and even if I have Windows 8, unfortunately I don't have a touch screen, so I won't be able to do a whole lot with that. So what we want to do is look at creating a table in Datasheet view. And the default view that you get in Access is Datasheet view. It looks like a spreadsheet. You have a series of columns and rows. Again, do not get this confused with Excel. Excel is a spreadsheet application that is part of Microsoft Office, but Access just happens to lay out by default its tables into Datasheet view. The view can be changed, but again, this is the default, the automatic view that comes up. So we want to look at creating the first table here, and notice that we default to something called Table 1. We will want to change that name to be something that is descriptive of the table. What is the content of the table? So we'll be wanting to look at that. So anyway, so how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we want to look at creating the table. In the visit table, we are going to have a visit ID field, a patient ID field, a visit date field, a reason field, and walk-in field. Now, so here we are looking at these 5 fields, and so when we look at that, we want to look at the rules for naming fields in an Access table. And you have those listed in a green section in your book called Pro Skills. It says Decision Making, Naming Fields in Access Tables. So what are the guidelines for doing that? A field name can consist of up to 64 characters, including letters, numbers, spaces, and special characters, except for the period, exclamation mark, grave accent, and square brackets. A field name cannot begin with a space. Capitalize the first letter of each word in a field name that combines multiple words. For example, visit date has a capital V for visit and a capital D for date. Now, the first 2 items, a field name can consist up to 64 characters, including letters, numbers, spaces, and special characters, but no period, no exclamation point, no grave accent, and no square brackets. That's a rule. You're going to have an error if you try to do otherwise. A field name cannot begin with a blank space. If you start it with a blank space, you're going to have an error. But when we get down to capitalize the first letter of each word in a field name that combines multiple words, for example, the visit date with capital V for visit, D for date, is not something that would give you an error. They're just trying to teach you a pattern for consistency so that all people who work with databases are following the same techniques. Okay? Use concise field names that are easy to remember and reference, and that won't take up a lot of space in the table data sheet. Again, that's a guideline. It's not really a rule. It's a highly recommended procedure because you want to make things easy to remember, but that includes not only what the name represents, but how long the name is. Use standard abbreviations such as NUM for number, AMT for amount, or QTY for quantity, and so on. And wherever you use them once, use them throughout the database because they need to match wherever they're referenced throughout your whole database. Give fields descriptive names so that you can easily identify them when you view or edit the records. So it tells you something about what is in that table or what is in that field, what type of data. If I have a telephone number field, I don't want to call it zip code because I'm not storing zip codes in that. It's going to be a telephone number. Okay, so it should be descriptive. Give fields descriptive names, we've already said that. Although Access supports the use of spaces in field names and in other object names, experienced database developers avoid using space. Now, we sort of got cut off in the last video that I was doing regarding this Chatham database. So we've created the blank database, and we're talking about how to name fields, tables, databases, and such. And one of the last things we were saying was that we even though Access allows blank spaces within the names of its objects and its database name, we don't want to use those if we don't have to, because you've got to be consistent throughout, and you don't want to forget that you put a blank space in there. So let's look at our screen here. I have expanded this out so that you could see the menu options up here at the top. So if we look at that, the first field that we see that's automatically created in any new blank database is the ID field, and it is an auto number field, and that means for every row of data, which remember a row represents a record, for every row there'll be an ID number assigned, and it'll start with 1 and then 2 and 3 and so on. The problem is, if you think back to your textbook where we looked at the visit table or visit ID table, actually it's visit table, this field is called the visit ID field. The ID numbers had 4 characters in them, specifically 4 digits, but 4 characters, not just a 1 or 2 or 3. If you go back and look at the patient table, each patient ID happened to be a number. IDs are not always totally numeric, but in these 2 cases they have been set up that way. But you see that it's things like 22510 or something like that for the patient ID, not just the numbers 1, 2, 3, and so on. So typically we don't want to leave this as an auto number field. Well, one of the things we do want to change, since this is the visit table, is to rename this ID field name to be something more representative and descriptive of the data that's going to go in here. So we're going to right click over top of ID, okay, and choose rename, and we're going to type in visit, whoops, I have to spell it correctly, ID. I have to spell it correctly just because from here on when I spell it, I will spell it correctly. If I have it misspelled here, I've got to misspell it the same way throughout so that it will match. So there we go, press enter, and you'll notice that it takes that name. So we're just about to the end of this time here, so we're going to have to stop and start a new video.